Hi guys, this is Pranav here from Prepco, here to start our course on legal reasoning. This is a 6-part series on legal reasoning, and in today's lecture I will be giving you a brief introduction to the section that is legal reasoning. So I'll be telling you what all it comprises of, what are the important points for you to remember, the types of questions that you can expect, and how you should go about attempting those questions. So let's dive right in. So the breakup of marks and the type of questions that you can expect in this section. So legal reasoning comprises of around 35 to 39 questions, which is roughly 25% of the question paper. And the types of questions that you expect are there'll be passages of around 450 words each, and they can relate to three different topics. So firstly, there will be factual scenarios involving legal matters. Secondly, there can be public policy questions, like the passages can be based on a public policy question. And third, there can be moral philosophical inquiries. So in this lecture I have one illustration of each of these three types, so that should give you an idea of the types of questions that you can expect. So these passages are followed by a series of questions, around 4 or 5 questions on each passage, and they require you to be able to identify the most relevant principles or inferences which are set out in the passage. Then you are expected to identify the principles which are relevant to the given question. Then you apply the principles to the factual situation given in the question, and then you choose the most correct option out of the four. And sometimes in the question they may also change the wording of the principle which was set out in the passage, and you should be able to understand how that change in one word, etc., can alter the result, how it can lead to a different answer. So some important points for you to remember for answering this section is that no prior knowledge of law is necessary for you. So law you will learn in law school, and this is merely a test of your reasoning skills. So don't worry if you do not, you feel like this question I don't know this principle by heart, I don't know the case laws on this section. That doesn't matter, they're not expecting you to know all of that. So whatever is there in the question is essentially all that you need to attempt the answer. So what the all the principles relevant to the question will be given in the passage itself, and the principle will also be explained in the passage itself. So you are only expected to pick out that principle, identify it, and then apply it to the question. So do not go into this with the idea that this is a test of my legal knowledge. It is not. However, we will be giving you in the next few lectures, I will be giving you the basic principles of a few important laws, so that it saves you time and you know like what nuisance is, what tort is, what contracts are. So all that knowledge we will be giving you. Furthermore, the questions, they may change some facts, they may alter one word from the principle which was given to you in the passage. So don't be in a hurry, you have to read everything carefully. Don't see one word and be like, I know this principle, I've read this before, and then go on to attempting the question. No, they may have modified the principle also. So please read everything carefully before you go on to attempt the questions. Also, whenever you identify a principle, try breaking it into as small of a parts as possible. So I'll give you an example. So if the principle were to read that an agreement is enforceable in law if parties competent to contract enter into it with free consent for consideration, and that the contract is not contrary to law or against public policy, then the agreement is enforceable. So if we break this principle up, the essentials of the principle would be that for an agreement to be enforceable, 4 conditions have to be met. Firstly, that the parties to the agreement must be competent to contract. Secondly, they should enter into this agreement with free consent. Third, there should be a consideration flowing for this agreement. And fifth, the contract should not be contrary to law or public policy. So only when all 4 of these conditions are met would the agreement be enforceable. If even one of these conditions were not to be met, for example, if the agreement was not entered into with free consent, then even if the other 3 conditions were met, the agreement would not be enforceable. However, if we change one word of this principle, it will change the entire result. So here we come to or and conditions. So what are these or and conditions? So what we just saw was an example of and conditions. So and condition is basically that only when all 4 of the essential points were met would the agreement become enforceable. Even if one of those conditions were not met, the agreement would not be enforceable. However, if I modify this principle to make it an or condition, I'll tell you how that can change the result. So, if instead of what I just saw you, instead of what I just showed you, if the principle were to read as an agreement is enforceable at law if parties competent to contract enter into it with free consent for consideration, or if the contract is not contrary to law or against public policy, then here we would have 3 and conditions and 1 or condition. So I have only changed 2 words. So after for consideration, earlier it read and if the contract is not contrary. Now I've changed it to or if the contract is not contrary. What is the change to the result? What is the change to the principle? So if you apply, if you think about it, now the entire principle changes completely just because of this one word. Now, for an agreement to be enforceable, firstly, 3 conditions should be met. That is, the parties to the agreement must be competent to contract, must have entered into it with free consent, and they must have entered into it for a consideration, or that the contract should not be contrary to law or public policy. So here, if either the first 3 conditions are met or if the last condition is met, in both these circumstances the agreement would become enforceable. So for example, even if the first 3 conditions are not met, that is, the parties are not competent to contract, they did not enter into it with free consent, and there was no consideration flowing for the contract, even then, if the contract is not contrary to law or public policy, it would become enforceable. So here this is the difference between and or conditions. Or means that either one or two of the essentials of the principles are required to make the principle applicable, and whereas in the and conditions, all of the essentials of the principle to be need to be met for something to happen. So keep this in mind whenever you see or whenever you see and in the principle. Remember, this is the application of that. This is the effect that those words have on the end result. So here we move on to the illustrations. That is, I told you the 3 types of 3 types of passages you can expect. So this is the illustration of the first type of passage that you can expect. So firstly, you can expect factual scenarios involving legal matters. So here the passage tells you that the first clause in Article 20 of the Constitution prohibits retroactive criminal legislation. That is, a person cannot be convicted for an offence which was not an offence at the time at which it was committed. The second protection in Article 20 is against double jeopardy and provides that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. The third guarantee in Article 20 is against self-incrimination or compelling a person to be a witness against herself. Now in Kathi Kalu Ogad, the Supreme Court held that the prohibition against compelling a person to be a witness against herself related to the production of information based on personal knowledge, which is also called testimonial evidence, but this did not extend to the protection of physical evidence like a writing sample or a thumb impression, which is known as physical evidence. Now Mahmood Kaskar, who was residing in the city of Mumbai, was long suspected of having committed several offences which included smuggling. Now Kaskar came across a police checkpost on 15th December 2019 and afraid that the police would find the contraband that he had hidden in the trunk of his car, he drove through the checkpost instead of stopping. In doing so, he smashed his car through the barricades at the checkpost, and a piece from the barricades flew a few feet away and injured a policeman who was manning the checkpost. Kaskar was later caught and charged with the offence of obstruction of justice. However, he was acquitted for the same since the police could not furnish sufficient evidence before the court. Some months later, the police, bent on teaching Kaskar a lesson, filed charges of injuring a police officer on duty against Kaskar. Here you should pause the video, go back if you felt that I read through it a bit fast. You just go back a bit, read through the passage again at your own pace, and the exercise that you need to do is identify the relevant legal principles that you can identify from the passage, and also the important facts which according to you are important from this passage. You list them out, point 1, point 2, point 3, etc., and a similar exercise for the facts. So do this exercise, then compare them with the ones which I have showed you, because this is the only way that you should tackle these types of questions. So now I will tell you the important principles which I culled out from the passage. Firstly, a person cannot be convicted for an offence which was not an offence at the time at which it was committed. Secondly, no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. Third, no person can be compelled to be a witness against himself. Fourth, the third protection extends only to testimonial evidence and not to physical evidence. Now the important facts which were given in the question. First, Kaskar was charged with obstruction of justice the first time and he was acquitted for the same. Second, the incident occurred on 15th of December 2019, that is he barred into the barricade then. Third, the second set of charges were for injuring a police officer on duty. So these are the important principles and important facts for the question. Sorry, just a detour. By the way, if you have any queries on anything that I'm of this lecture, then feel free to leave your doubts in the comment section below, and we will try our best to resolve each and every doubt. So moving on, these were the important principles and facts which were laid out in the passage. Now let's move on to the question that you can expect based on such passage. So now the question is that Mr. Kaskar was convicted on the basis of the second set of charges, and he filed an appeal arguing that the conviction violated his right against double jeopardy under Article 20. Now will he succeed? The options before you are: yes, since he had already been prosecuted for crashing through the barricades and could not be prosecuted for the same actions again. No, since the second charge filed against Kaskar was in relation to a different offence than the first one. Option C: yes, since he had already been acquitted the first time. Or option D: no, since he was a serial offender. Now, take a look at the important principles that we had listed down. Now, your job is to identify which is the most relevant principle from those and apply it to the question. Also, keep in mind the facts of the passage. The important fact is that first time he was charged with one offense, and the second time he was charged with a different offense. So the most correct option is option B, and the relevant principle for you is the principle 2 which we had identified, which says that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. So this is an and condition, meaning both of the two parts of the principle need to be satisfied for a person to be getting benefit of Article 20. So since in this factual scenario he was convicted for a different offense the second time, and he was also prosecuted for a different offense the second time, the correct option for you to choose is option B. The other three options are not the correct versions, as they are not what you can cull out from the relevant principles and the relevant facts. Okay, so this is how you look at a question, this is how you apply a principle, and this is how you rationalize the answer, rationalize the correct answer in your mind. So let's move on to the second question based on this passage. So sometimes after the two prosecutions, the police managed to recover CCTV footage from the area near the accident site, and they file fresh charges of obstructing justice against Kaskar for crashing through the checkpost. Now, will this violate his protection against double jeopardy? The options for you are yes, since Kaskar is a citizen of India and is protected under Article 20. Option B: no, since the police are in possession of fresh evidence. Option C: yes, since he had been prosecuted for the offence and he was acquitted. Option D: no, since he was prosecuted but he was not punished for the offence in the first trial. Now this question should be easy for you because the relevant principle is again what we just saw for the first question. So look at principle 2 and attempt the answer, and it should be obvious for you. The correct option is again option D. Now this is because principle number 2, which we had just seen, says that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. So apart from prosecution, if a prosecution leads to an acquittal the first time, that does not entitle a person to claim the benefit of Article 20. It is only when he is prosecuted and punished for the same offense that he cannot be tried again for the same thing. So since in the present case Kaskar wasn't punished in the first case, he was acquitted for lack of evidence, the protection under Article 20 does not apply. So let's look at another question based on this passage. Now, concerned at the increasing number of instances of rash driving in Mumbai, the government passed a law on 12th January 2020 which made rash driving a criminal offence punishable with 3 months imprisonment. The police now seeks to punish him under this law. Is this permissible? Now the options are yes, since Kaskar had injured a policeman when he drove through the checkpost. No, since driving through a checkpost is not rash driving. Option C, no, since rash driving was not an offence at the time Kaskar drove through the checkpost. Option D, yes, since Kaskar had been prosecuted for different offences in the previous trial. Now here a different principle is relevant. So go back to the principles you listed down, choose the principle which you think is relevant to this question, and also one very important fact from the passage is relevant. So let's I'll tell you the correct answer and please see if you identified the correct answer. The correct answer is option C. As principle 1 of the passage provides that a person cannot be convicted for an offence which was not an offence at the time at which it was committed. Now if you see the relevant facts, he drove through the barricade on 15th December 2019, but the new law came into force only in January 2020. So that cannot have retrospective application to make Kaskar liable. Hence option C is the correct option. So this is how you attempt these questions. This is what it means by identifying principles, identifying the most correct principle for the question, applying the principle. Okay. So these are the things you have to keep in mind before when you attempt legal reasoning. Now let's move on to the second types of passages that you can expect. So illustration 2 is the passages relating to public policy. Now India's Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 starts encouragingly. It seeks to protect the privacy of individuals relating to their personal data. But by the end, it is clear that it is not designed to deliver on the promise. For even as it rightly requires handlers of data to abide by globally accepted rules about getting an individual's consent first, it disappointingly gives wide powers to the government to dilute any of these provisions for its agencies. Now recently, messaging platform WhatsApp said that some Indian journalists and rights activists were among those spied on using technology made by an Israeli company, which by its own admission only works for government agencies across the world. Importantly, one of the first to raise a red flag about the bill's problematic clauses was Justice B.N. Srikrishna, whose committee's report forms the basis of the bill. Justice Srikrishna has used words such as Orwellian and Big Brother in reaction to the removal of safeguards against actions of government agencies. In its report last July, the committee noted that the dangers to privacy originate from state and non-state actors. It therefore called for exemptions to be watertight, narrow, and available for use in limited circumstances. It had also recommended that the government bring in a law for the oversight of intelligence gathering activities, the means by which non-consensual processing of data takes place. A related concern about the bill is regarding the constitution of the Data Protection Authority, which is to monitor and enforce the provisions of the Act. Now, this Data Protection Authority will be headed by a chairperson and it will have not more than 6 full-time members all of whom are to be selected by a panel filled with government nominees. Now, this completely disregards the fact that government agencies are also regulated under the bill, that they are the major collectors and processors of data themselves. The sweeping powers the bill gives to the government render meaningless the gains from the landmark Puttaswamy case, which culminated in the recognition that privacy is intrinsic to life and liberty and is therefore a basic right. That idea of privacy is certainly not reflected in the bill in its current form. So here, this is the passage. Now here your attempt to answer the questions is different. Your exercise is also slightly different from the one you followed in the earlier types of passages. So here, as you see, there is no clear legal principle or clear facts which are given to you. So here you have to pull out the important inferences that the author is trying to make in the passage. So instead of identifying relevant legal principles or relevant legal facts, you have to try and find out what are the most important points that the author is trying to make in his argument. So in this, your exercise is similar to the one you follow in the reading comprehension section basically. So pause the video, rewind the video, read the passage again at your own pace and attempt to list down the important inferences which you can identify from this passage. Then you can compare them to the ones which I have identified. So this will give you an idea of where you are at. So the important inferences which I have culled out from the passage are that firstly, the Personal Data Protection Bill seeks to protect the privacy of individuals relating to their personal data. Secondly, according to the author, it does not meet its standards as the government can dilute protection standards for allowing its agencies to access data. 3. The Justice Sri Krishna Committee had noted the dangers to privacy and called for exceptions against privacy to be watertight. 4. The committee also recommended insertion of a law for oversight of intelligence gathering activities. 5. The problem with the Data Protection Authority is that all of its members are selected by the government. And lastly, the idea of privacy being a basic right as laid down in the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment is not reflected in the bill in its current form. So these are the important inferences from the passage. Now let's look at the types of questions which you can get from this passage. So first question is, which of the following views can be correctly attributed to the author of the above passage? First, that the idea of privacy is not relevant to the bill. Second, the idea of privacy can be overridden by government agencies since their role is to protect citizens. Option C, the idea of privacy as a basic right is not adequately addressed in the bill in its current form. Option D, since the bill gives sweeping powers to the government, it is meaningless to reflect the idea of privacy in the bill. Now here, remember, you have to choose the most correct option. So first is that option A is out of the question, as that is not something which the author has tried to say. He said, according to the author, the other three can be like, you can say that he has tried to argue somehow that the other three options are somewhat relevant, but the most correct one you have to choose. So look at your inferences and try and identify which is the most correct option out of the four, which you can directly say that this is exactly what the author had tried to tell us. So let's see what the correct option is. The correct option is option C, as it directly corresponds to point 6 of our inferences. So if you turn back and remember the concluding lines of the passage, the author explicitly said that the K.S. Puttaswamy had identified privacy as a basic right, and the bill in its current form has not done justice to this right. So the option C, which said that the idea of privacy is as a basic right is not adequately addressed in the bill in its current form, is exactly what the author was trying to tell us. The other options are something which go beyond, which go a little beyond than what the author had tried to tell us. That is why option C is the most correct option. So let's go on to the second question based on this passage. So assume that the bill is amended and that the government's powers to provide exemptions for its agencies are removed. In such a situation, according to the author, the bill would deliver on its promise of seeking to protect the privacy of individuals relating to their personal data. The bill would not deliver on its promise of seeking to protect the privacy of individuals relating to their personal data. Option C, the bill would not deliver on its promise since it is necessary for the government to have such exemptions in order to effectively do its work. Or option D, the bill would be a failure since the government would not be able to implement it. Now, the correct option is option A, as point number 2 of the passage tells us. Sorry, the author had said that the government should not be given the option or the power to provide exemptions for its agencies, as the government agencies are in fact as the government itself is a major processor of data. So the author felt that giving government the power to override the protection of the data, override the protection of the bill is a dangerous thing, and allowing its agencies to go beyond what the data protection bill is a very dangerous thing. So if this power to provide exemptions was removed, according to the author, it would make the bill much more relevant, and it would help deliver on the promise of seeking to protect privacy of individuals. Thus option A is the correct option. So this is why A was the correct option. Now let's move on to the last type of passages that you can expect, which is the moral philosophical inquiries. Now last week the government used the Drug Price Control Order 2013 to increase the price ceiling for 21 medicines by as much as 50% to ensure their availability in the market. Now this is a welcome move according to the author, because lower prices would have further limited the availability of these drugs, some of which include those used for malaria, leprosy and allergies. The decision by the regulatory authority is usually known to reduce prices of essential drugs, and was prompted by repeated petitions by the pharmaceutical industry, which pointed out that the increasing costs of imports had made the production of some of these drugs unviable. Now, prices of bulk drugs and active pharmaceutical ingredients have in fact gone up by 88% and are largely imported. This raises a basic question, that is, should the government control prices? The motivation for controlling drug prices is not very difficult to understand, as unlike some of the developed countries where most of the population has insurance coverage or where the medical facilities are provided by the state, medical expenses in India are borne by the citizens largely through out of pocket expenses. Therefore, the state intervention by keeping prices of some drugs in check to continue such. Therefore, the state intervenes by keeping prices of some of the drugs in check to contain such spending. However, the unintended consequence is that it affects the supply of drugs and can potentially make citizens worse off. The risk of non availability was an important reason for raising prices. Although all pharmaceutical companies may not stop producing drugs with price control, they may certainly limit the supply of drugs. Further, the government usually deters on price hikes because of political considerations so that it is not accused of favoring private companies. Thus, the government should stay away from dictating prices and allow the market to function. Competition in the marketplace will ensure that no company is able to make extraordinary profits in basic and essential drugs, since the state has limited resources. It should focus on regulation and ensure that the quality of drugs supplied in the market is not compromised at any point. Now, even in this type of passage, your exercise is similar to the one that you took in illustration 2. That is, you should cull out the important inferences which the author is trying to make. So, again, pause the video, rewind it, read the passage again at your own pace, and cull out the important inferences according to you, compare them to the ones which I have found. So, the important inferences which I found from the passage are that firstly, the government increased the price ceiling of drugs for ensuring their availability. Secondly, the author supports this move as according to him otherwise there would be a scarcity of drugs. Third, decision due to representation made by companies who point out that the cost of imports of raw materials has increased. That is, this decision of the government was due to representation made by the companies. Fourth, the government is motivated to regulate drug prices as there is no universal insurance coverage in India. However, this regulation can lead to pharma companies stopping production of drugs. Fifth, the government usually does not increase price due to political considerations. Sixth, the government should stay away from regulating prices and allow the market to regulate itself. Option 7, competition in the marketplace will automatically regulate price. And sorry, I think I said option 7, it is point 7. And option 8, point 8, government should limit regulation to ensuring quality of drugs. Now, these are the important points, and also remember that it's better even if you think that one point will not be that relevant. For example, I don't think point 5 will be that relevant to any question, but you do not know the question, right? You're reading the passage first and then you're going to move on to the question subsequently. So it's better at the first instance only to list down any and everything that you think is relevant from the passage. List down any point, list down any inference which you think is relevant, because what that will do is that will save you time. Because then if you find a question and you have not listed down this inference, then you won't have to again go back to the passage and read it again, identify the correct principle, as that will take you a lot of time and this as CLAT, as you know, is very hard on time. Like time, you have to manage your time very efficiently in order to actually do well in this exam. So hence, like, it's much better if you list down any and everything which you think is relevant from the passage, and then only then move on. It's okay if you have 2 extra points which in the latter run you find that they were not relevant for any of the questions, but that's better than missing out on some of the important points which may be relevant to the question. So the first question based on this passage is that an essential medicine, formula A, is used to treat cancer, and there is only one company in the entire market which is undertaking this manufacture. If this is true, then based on the author's reasoning in the passage above, option A, the state should not control the price of formula A, since it should allow the market to function. Option B, the state should control the price of formula A, since there is no competition in the marketplace and it cannot function to control the price of medicine. Option C, the state should ban the sales of formula A and ask patients to consider using some other medicine that is made by more than one manufacturer. Or option D, the state should take up the manufacture of formula A itself. Now here, try and identify which of the inference is relevant to this question and attempt the correct answer. Then let's pause it if you want, then we'll compare it to what I have found. So correct option, this is a typo, I apologize. Correct option is option B, as the inferences 6 and 7 show that the government should not regulate the prices only when there is enough competition in the market to regulate the price. So where there is no competition, the government has to step in. The author only said that the government should not step in when there is enough competition in the market. When there are 3 companies and one company has very high prices and the other 2 companies have lower prices for the same drug, then the third company will be forced to lower its own price, as otherwise it would make no sales. So this is what it means by regulating the market. But when there is only one company, it enjoys a monopoly, that is, it has no competition, so it is the only person which is dictating how much it is charging for the drug. So it can charge exorbitant amounts and people will be forced to buy it since there is no other alternative. So in these circumstances, even according to the author, the government will compulsorily have to step in and regulate the price. So this is how one change in the fact can change the entire result. Correct. So this is this is what your reasoning should be when you attempt questions. Now let's move on to another question based on this passage. So assume that the state removes all price essentials on an essential medicine. Price restrictions on an essential medicine, and pharmaceutical companies start selling that medicine at a price which is nearly 5 times its earlier price. In such a situation, based on the author's reasoning, option A, the state should not control the price of the medicine, since competition in the market would eventually lead to an appropriate price being set. Option B, the state should not control the price of the medicine, since the price increase is directly attributable to an increase in the price of ingredients used in the medicine. Option C, the state should not control the price of the medicine, but it should supply the ingredients for medicine at lower prices. Option D, the state should control the price of the medicine, since people may not be able to afford it anymore. Now again, the relevant principles are what we just saw for the earlier question. Applying those to the question, choose an option. Let's see if you've got it correct. The correct option is A, As the author has regularly argued that the market will eventually regulate itself. So even if today the prices are high, tomorrow when the companies find that no one is ready to buy at these prices, they will be forced to lower their own prices. And according to the author, this is okay, this little period of harm is okay, as the government's interference has the potential to do more harm than good, which he has regularly argued. So that is why option A is the correct option. Give the market the time to regulate itself. Eventually, it will lead to the optimal price being fixed. Now, some pointers on what should you do to improve your understanding of this legal reasoning section and how to ace it. So firstly, as you saw, the passages are going to be really lengthy, and if you saw the CLAT 2020 paper, which I'm sure you must have, then you know that that was a 49-page question paper, and it is full of passages. So not just for legal reasoning, for CLAT as a whole, you need to improve your reading speed. And reading speed does not mean just glancing through everything. You should be able to read and identify everything as fast as you can. That is, read one passage, identify the relevant inferences in 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. You should be able to do that. To get to improve this, you need to read as much as possible. Read the editorials from the newspapers, like Hindu or whichever newspaper you read. There are the editorial section. Read that. Attempt the same exercise there. That is, carve out the important inferences that you find from the editorial. See, time yourself doing that. See your progress week in, week out. This will not only help you with your GK, because here you're actually going to then dissect. When you write down something from the editorial, you will remember the general knowledge thing necessary, and it is also helping you increase your reading speed and your identification speed as a whole. And thirdly, you should solve as many questions as possible. Anywhere that you any material that you have, solve the entire thing. The universal guide books, which are the bulky books full of sample questions, solve the entire thing. Okay, because solving questions is the only actual practice you have. Always remember, theory is not at all relevant for CLAT. Theory, like you rote learning something, or you going to look at laws for legal reasoning, is the absolutely unnecessary exercise for you to do. Okay, so here this is my conclusion of the first lecture. Hope you enjoy. Hope it was helpful to you. If you found it helpful, please like and subscribe to this lecture. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'm sorry. And we will be coming out with a lot new videos, lot of new material on the other sections of CLAT as well, including the reading comprehension, quantum theory, etc., etc. So please, it will help us broaden our reach. And as I said earlier, if you had any queries based on this lecture, feel free to leave it in the comment section, and we will try our best to resolve it. So I'll see you soon in the second lecture, in which I will be giving you a brief intro to the principles of the law of torts, and I'll also give you an illustrative of the questions which you can get based on law of torts. So bye bye, have a great day, and best of luck.